Hello, everybody. Welcome to Reddit Roasts number 11, I believe. John, lovely to see you again.
Nice to see you too, Sam. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. So, really interesting roast today. We have two basketball coaches who are looking to pivot, pun intended. We have somebody who manages radioactive waste. Is that going to work for them, or is their profile going to be toxic? Pun also intended. And bonus, we're going to explore whether 6 months of hard labor would make MBA grads better hires. Random one, but we've bitten on some bait on Reddit, so let's get stuck in. John, first profile. Let me walk you through it, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. So, long-time follower of the sub, joined the club. Looking for some general thoughts. White, 29-year-old male American living and working in London. Bit of international experience there. Undergrad, 3.1 GPA in history from a top 50 liberal arts school. Think Macalester, Kalamazoo, etc. Lots of extracurriculars, mostly basketball related. Masters in education with a 3.2 GPA mid-level state school while working as a graduate assistant. Experience, college basketball coach, more basketball. Work, John, tech sales. Pivoted into software as a service sales, mid-sized public company, think Asana, etc. Has had a bunch of promotions. Has taken the GRE, in his words, shitty, but I think with a 310 we can agree it's not great. Why MBA? Has worked in tech sales for quite a while. The bullshit is weighing on me despite the comp and wants to pivot. Is thinking of pivoting into consulting or maybe tech strategy. Interesting. Lots of pros and cons, blah, blah, blah. Right, let's do a profile analysis first. John, how do you see this profile?
I think it's an okay profile overall. I'll cycle through the different categories as per usual. Academically, a 3.1 at a liberal arts school isn't a notably not prestigious one. When you major in the humanities, something humanities can be challenging, especially if you don't have the quant grades to show for it. Maybe OP has taken a few quant classes and scored well there. But with a 3.1, I'm not assuming that they were all A's. Additionally, most business schools know that a lot of liberal arts schools inflate their GPAs. So there needs to be a good explanation for this, and there needs to be a high test score to offset this 3.1 liberal arts school. That's my thoughts on the academics. Professionally, look, tech sales can be a bit pigeonholy. We've worked with our fair share of folks in this industry. What adcoms may see among this pool is that people in tech sales may not have or readily demonstrate evidence of analytical ability, work that demonstrates strategy. But it's great that OP has had 3 promos and a pretty strong comp to show that, he's doing something right at work. I do like the basketball coach bit. I think that can be differentiating, especially if there's a strong narrative about motivation both there and at its job. So potentially looking up here with a professional bucket. Demographically, look, white male in tech sales is not the most differentiating, Sam, but it's good at least that OP has had the experience of working in London. I think that can help a lot. So that's my thought there. And then goals, look, the GPA is not going to help OP immediately land a job in an MBB. But perhaps if OP were to qualify that list with, an organizational consulting firm, tech consulting firm that plays off of his strengths and background, I think that can allay doubt a little bit. So all in all, some bright spots that can potentially help steer OP in the right direction. I am hopeful that 3.1 is probably the biggest red mark in his profile. Other than that, onwards to you.
Let's talk about that liberal arts school part of the educations. Can you expand on this? It's particularly for international applicants for whom the concept of a liberal arts school might be a little bit unclear. How do schools perceive an applicant who is applying from a liberal arts school versus someone else?
I don't think there's much of a difference. I think the two central biases is that liberal arts school they would obviously offer more technically oriented degrees and to some extent, but perhaps not uh, the same breadth as as it would be offered at a national university. And most liberal arts schools obviously don't have graduate schools, so that's one thing that schools consider. So that prevents students from taking higher level courses if need be. But liberal arts school, that there are a ton of really great liberal arts schools, Williams, Amherst, Middlebury, and a lot of them end up going on to getting into top schools. But a lot of these schools have grade inflation. And so, a 3.9 at a Bowdoin can translate, it's often, maybe a 3.7 at an equivalent university at the same rank. I wouldn't say, there's a huge bias against liberal arts school. I think in most cases, if you graduate from a well-known liberal arts school, it can help you. But there just needs to be the applicants just need to show a little bit more rigor in their, whether academically or at work to make up for some of that bias.
Sure. I would say that in this specific case, regardless of liberal arts school or whatever, I think a 3.2 GPA is going to need, actually, sorry, 3.1 GPA in history. I think, one of the things that we tell everybody who's got a relatively low GPA is you're going to need to explain why. Use the optional essay to explain why your GPA was a 3.1. In this case, the clue is maybe in this lots of extracurriculars. Okay, that might play into it. Just make sure that your reason for your relatively low GPA is really solid. And ideally, you can point to a positive that's come out of it. For example, these extracurriculars led to an increased, better leadership style, and that's been and that you've used in your tech sales job over here. Like, use that optional essay to explain the low GPA, but also how it has, in a way, benefited you, and how the extracurriculars have benefited you. Okay, the other question, John, that I wanted to ask is around the living in London. So, you mentioned this is something that's offsetting an otherwise quite demographically neutral profile. How can an applicant use an international experience like London to strengthen their profile? How can you make the most of that?
I think when you're thrust into a new environment with a different culture, even though obviously both USA and London are English speaking territories, I think there invariably ends up being situations where you have to adapt yourself, find ways to build rapport with colleagues, whether you're trying to sell an idea or get something across. And I think filling those gaps and learning how to work with people from different backgrounds, from different cultures, that is always, building up that experience is valuable to adcoms. And it's always a positive indication of their ability to do the same further along in their career, particularly if they're able to succeed at this task.
I think the point that I always refer to here is that business schools like LBS, for example, have like 70 different nationalities. It's not quite so much variation in the US schools, but it's still a lot. And the adcoms want to see that you can work with people from different backgrounds, that you're not going to enter into, going to have cultural clash. You're going to be able to collaborate with your study group who are from all over the world. And this international experience reassures them that you are able to do that. Also, I mean, some schools explicitly ask about your international experience. I believe LBS is one of them. But other schools, you just might want to just use this as a story, right? If you are asked about a leadership story in one of your essays, maybe that leadership story is when I encountered a cultural challenge. In London, the leadership style of management is very different from the leadership style used in America, etc. It might also just play into a really strong story in another part of your application, which is just exposure that other applicants don't have. They don't have the opportunity to tell that story. So you're at an advantage leveraging this experience. Any other ideas jumping to mind, John?
Totally. Look, many schools have different ways of asking that question, right? You have, maybe it's a DEI question from Berkeley Haas. Maybe it's, the curiosity and growth essay from HBS. Maybe it's the inclusivity essay from Darden, right? The experience of molding yourself in a different culture can be so versatile, and I think OP would do best to leverage this in some way.
I like it. I really, really like it. Let's talk about goals.
Sure.
So experiences in tech sales. As he mentions, there's this key line here, which is that he's thinking of either going into consulting or explore different avenues or get back into tech, but in strategy. Now, for me personally, the piece of this that resonates most, I don't think consulting is, anyone who's watched these roasts in the past will know that I'm not particularly excited about people using consulting as a goal, unless there's very good reason for it. Honestly, I don't see a particularly good reason here. So my inclination is to stick with where the applicant is strong, which is in this tech environment. And a narrative for me that is like, I've been in tech sales, but I'm getting a bit frustrated with the bullshit. Obviously, don't use those words, but I want to pivot into a strategy role in the same sector where I'm going to be, guiding the teams of tech sales, where I'm going to be setting our overall corporate strategy, where I'm going to be weighing in on potential acquisitions, go-to-market strategies, and sort of a more expansive role within the same sector. To me, that could be a really compelling narrative. Are you on board?
I love that. I love that, especially when you're able to reposition these grievances as opportunities. Schools don't like it when you complain about things, Sam. So I think, you can turn it into like, this is what I've noticed when I was working in tech sales. I noticed that there were, there are opportunities to do this that people weren't really capturing. And, now that I've learned how to motivate people and bring people along the journey, I want to find a way to break down silos. There are so many ways you can take this
Love that.
that show initiative, that show, your ability to just proactively think of problems and go ahead and then tackle them. Schools will love this. And it will show up well on the recommendations too.
Okay, let's do a back of the envelope structuring of a career goals essay. OP,
Sure.
get a pen, write this down. Right, imagine opening your story. So we're talking about like the typical 500-word career goals story that nearly every school asks. So imagine opening the story of engaging with a particular client who is in maybe a new demographic or a new industry or a new country, realizing that this industry is under penetrated, questioning why. My post-MBA goal is to move into a position of corporate strategy at a firm like Asana, where I've been working, where I'll expand into this new market, this new industry, this new area. And here's why I need an MBA to do that. And that's your career goals essay. Absolutely.
I love it.
Fantastic. Awesome stuff. John, last point on this application, the golden handcuffs. OP's talking a little bit about the golden handcuffs, talks as well about his salary in tech sales. Basically, it sounds like he's doing quite well in his work in terms of pay. Isn't sure about whether to do an MBA based on the opportunity cost involved. How do you approach this decision of golden handcuffs? How would you tackle this?
Well, it also depends on what's, you have to. A lot of folks think about MBA as, okay, well, if I worked during those 2 years, I would emerge with a promotion in hand. I would clear 200K, for instance. But most people don't realize that, MBA is as much about the long game as it is about the short game, right? That's why schools ask you about your long-term goals. Down the line, studies have shown that post MBA, that folks with an MBA eventually out earn the people who don't get the MBAs in similar industries. And obviously, please fact check me on this. But I think the golden handcuffs are applicable now. But if OP thinks long term, and if corporate strategy were the goal or consulting were the goal, that the upside can be much greater than what OP earns now.
Yeah, I'm aligned. I think there's a few factors that are at play here. I think one is, normally I tell people, like, manage the timing carefully. That's one thing you can do to mitigate the impact of this. If you've got like bonuses that are vesting in a few months' time or a year's time, like, use that schedule to your advantage, let them vest, and then hit submit. or then ask for your letters of recommendation. Be smart about timing. 1. 2, OP is 29 years old. So you can't wait that much longer, OP. You're at a point now, you'll already be 30, 31 at matriculation. That's already a few years above the average of these programs. So you're actually in a position where you haven't got that much wiggle room in terms of timing. I would say if you're going to do it, get on with it. And the last point I would mention on this is that, John, to your point about people long-term out earning with an MBA, tech sales, I would argue, is a classic case of that. Tech sales, heavily commission based. You're already earning 160K. That is going to plateau, right? That is going to plateau for sure. You're going to get to a point where you're doing the same thing. You're doing the same thing again. You're feeling like your role is repetitive. You can keep bringing in 160K, but with only the sales skills, you're not going to be progressing into management roles, etc. It's unlikely. And so an MBA could be the catalyst that breaks that glass ceiling and opens up the next leg of your career. So for that reason, I would argue that the long-term investment is probably worthwhile. Fair?
Very fair.
All right. Next profile. Let's do it. So we have a software engineer interested in MBAs. And he's also heir to a real estate business. This is an interesting one. So wanted some advice on how I should approach MBAs and whether M7 business schools are out of reach. Education. Bachelor's in computer engineering and in mathematics from a State University of New York school. Undergrad GPA 3.22, another weak GPA, John. GMAT this time, applicant does have a GMAT 750. Work experience, 2 FANG internships, 1 non-FANG internship, and then 4 years at Meta right out of college. 4 years at Meta, nice. Worked at Google and now as a principal level engineer. Overall aim for the career is to advance into a director role, although I would argue that's perhaps because you haven't seen what's available outside of your industry. Fine. Have received an offer for NVIDIA, etc. Okay, wanted some overall advice. Should I aim to complete an MBA soon, or maybe wait another 3 to 4 years and then do it? So we have a timing question here, John. Would like NYU Stern since it's in New York. Also, a caveat to this, or another angle, is I'm also heavily involved in my parents' real estate company, worth in the lower 9-figure range. I had to do a calculation on that. That means 100 million or more dollars. Started my own, which has done well. Nice. Always been interested in that field, but don't plan to go back into the family business. Don't plan to make a real estate career. Wondering whether to mention that on the apps for M7. Also, not worried about scholarships. Cool, nice position to be in. And got accepted into some master's programs we don't really care about. Okay, so John, profile evaluation. How are you seeing this candidate's profile?
I like this profile. And Sam, you and I have worked with a couple top flight engineers from companies like Google with very favorable results. So let's start from the top here. Look, with those stats, an admissions committee member is going to see a 3.22, and they'll say, well, something must have gone on, right? With a 750 and a Google career. And so with an optional essay, with a credible explanation, and just emphasis on how OP's experience at Google was rigorous and quantity, this shouldn't be a problem, especially, but a 3.22 is something that schools will have to offset somehow, even with that 750. So it is a flag, but I would say more of a pink flag than a red flag.
Okay.
Professionally, the Google brand will take OP very far in the application
and
process.
Meta.
Yes, Google and Meta, exactly. There's a little bit of a preconceived notion with not just folks at these companies, but just software engineers or engineers generally, that a lot of the work is sort of individual contributor focused. So if there's a leadership component that OP can talk about, that would be a plus. I think the added plus is that OP has this sizable family business, so it is kind of an entrepreneurial an entrepreneurial experience that OP can weave into it and sort of offset any of that individual contributor stereotype, that would really help their application. And man, just a quick side note here, Sam, but 100 mil business, in real estate, NYU, Columbia, J-term would love this candidate.
It's true.
Anyway, back to the, to the testimony here. Demographic not specified, so nothing to opine there. The goals give me a little bit of pause. If OP already has an offer from these companies, and with the rate at which tech companies are evolving, is an MBA truly needed? This is kind of where we would need, and we can talk about this in just a little bit, Sam, but this is kind of where OP really needs to explain what they'll get out of the MBA program, right? If there's an opportunity to weave in real estate somehow, that would be great, but it seems like OP doesn't want to be involved in the family business. That could be a mistake, just optically, if for some of these schools, but open to feedback. Over to you.
Yeah. So you alluded to there that we've had success with this sort of applicant in the past. I dug out some numbers. In the last 4 years, we've had at least one Meta or Google person get into Harvard, Stanford, Wharton. At least one. So really, and in some years, multiple. So really, I'm totally aligned with you. I feel very, very confident in the professional aspect of this profile. I think it'll take him a long way. Okay. I want to talk to you about this family business applicant aspect, because I think this is a really big factor that people sometimes mishandle. And I think OP is in a classic case here. OP's carved out his own career, right? He's got this family business. He could have easily just gone into the family business, stuck there, would have been very comfortable, but has forged this career at Meta, at Google, and that's awesome. So the question is, should he build his profile around Google or around the family business, or both? Now, my personal opinion on this, John, is that the business schools, particularly the NYU Sterns, the CBSs of the world, really like applicants with a family business background. Let's not sugarcoat it. They can afford the program. They can afford the program. As our colleague Alex Zarganis said in an interview last year, he was at Columbia, and he said, I had no poor classmates, or I had no poor international classmates. But what he's getting at here is that business schools know that OP is going to be able to afford the program and is going to be in a great position after graduation, regardless of his employment outcomes, because he can go into the family business if he needs to. So all this to say that I think OP should be referencing the family business, even if he doesn't plan to go into it. I would love to see a narrative that combines the tech background and the real estate background somehow. For example, construction tech is a booming booming industry right now. I wonder if OP could use his experience at Google to say, I'm going to tackle this problem that we face at our family business by building a software platform that connects contractors, for example, or by building a platform that automates the regulation application process, for example, the permit application process, for example. Some way of combining Google and the family business into one career narrative. Now, obviously, OP, you don't have to actually go and do this after your MBA, right? When you graduate from NYU or CBS, you do whatever you want, right? While you're there, you apply, you recruit for whatever you want. But we're talking about creating a narrative that makes sense for the reader. And I think that would be a really nice one. John, do you want to build on that?
I love that. Also had another client whose family was in construction. She was going at it from a branding angle. She had worked in corporate communications. At first, we were like, how are we going to make this work? And we somehow made it work. And this candidate of ours was able to get into some great schools with scholarships as well. Now, going back to this, idea of turning to the family business, some people have a begrudging attitude of returning to a family business, and schools sometimes ask, well, are you going to be motivated at school? And I think one way to take this a little further is if OP can find a way to build a new capability out of the family business and get a family business to endorse it. So it's quasi-entrepreneurship. It has the backing of $100 million plus business. And there's a clear need to leverage the MBA by way of academic learnings, a network, finding co-founders, finding a team to help run that business. The OP is not just going to have a great job post MBA, but OP is also going to recruit some of his classmates to work for this great company. Business schools cannot say no to that. That sounds great.
Fantastic, isn't it? Okay, interesting. So it sounds like you and me are both pretty aligned in terms of target schools. Like Columbia J-term just jumps out. So for those watching who aren't familiar with Columbia's J-term option, and surprisingly few people are aware of it, it's a accelerated MBA program that's part of Columbia Business School. It's exactly the same MBA qualification, except they do it in 18 months instead of in 24 months. So 1.5 years instead of 2 years. And basically they do that by cutting out the internship in the summer break. And so what they do is by having a shorter program, they tend to attract people who don't really need that internship in the middle. And so who does that mean? Family business applicants who know they're going to go back to the family business don't really need an internship. Sponsored applicants who know where they're going back to McKinsey after the MBA, they don't need an internship either. So there's a bunch of people who don't need an internship and who are perfectly cut out for Columbia J-term. And by the way, J-term stands for January term, which is when this 18-month program starts. And so that program attracts far less applicants. And if applicants are well suited to it, the chances of getting an admit from an M7 business school are much, much higher than just throwing themselves into the normal application pool for a Columbia MBA over 2 years. So worth bearing in mind. I think OP should consider that. John, any other programs?
I think those are the ones that jump to mind as well, Sam. But there are other programs that have good real estate. I think Duke would be a good one as well. They have a family business center. But honestly, many of these top M7s will find a way to accommodate someone with OP's profile and background.
Yeah. If OP wanted to move to Chicago or to Evanston, Kellogg has a very, very strong real estate program. But then the profile needs to be a bit more real estate focused. Then the application needs to be more real estate focused. If it was to be more tech focused, then the classic tech schools, MIT jumps to mind, would be really, really interesting. Okay, brilliant. I think we've covered everything there. Should we move on?
Yes, please.
Let's do it. Okay. We have another basketball player or trainer, basketball coach. So, hey everyone, I've lurked here for a while. Hello, welcome, one of us. I finally decided to put myself out there. I need some real advice, maybe some hope. My story is unconventional. Okay, I'm dead serious about breaking into IB or M&A consulting. Not a great start. Here's the deal, the ugly first. 2.3 GPA. Makes the 3.2s we were just talking about look strong. Major in economics and psych. Basically destroyed my GPA because I was running my family business during college. Okay, so there's a good reason for it. Offset by a GMAT focus edition of 755. So to anyone kind of unclear as to just how strong that is, we as a rule of thumb to convert that to the old GMAT, you add 45 points. So that's almost an 800 in the old GMAT, which is a perfect score. So that is an incredibly strong GMAT score. Turned my family business around from near bankruptcy to a $2.5 million average recurring revenue. Trained NBA players during the week. Interesting. Left the family business to build my own career in luxury goods, operations, process optimization, and finance. What I've been doing since, building financial models. Okay, a little bit of a finance angle there. Developed AI forecasting tools, consulted on compliance. Goal is a top 10 MBA. What I need help with, a few specific questions, John. Can I overcome my GPA with this story? How should I build my MBA story for investment banking? And is IB even realistic? Okay, John, profile evaluation. How do you see this profile?
Dive into it. But before we do, one thing you read there made me think about a cringy LinkedIn post that we can create from this. How teaching Kevin Durant how to count his breath when running taught me how to save my company from near bankruptcy. But in all seriousness, let's get into it. So profile wise, look, 755 makes my heart race in one way, and a 2.3 makes my heart race in the other way. And this is early on a Friday. I don't need this much stimulation. But even with a killer optional essay, you know, to explain why that 2.3 is in place, it's going to be very hard for any school to take this into their average, especially because this is on a 4.0 scale. If there's one school that may take a gamble on it, ironically, Sam, I think it's going to be HBS. HBS used to publish GPA ranges that we saw in the 2.5 high 2 range. They don't publish their ranges anymore, but I did see that they published their GMAT averages, and I saw a 540 lurking in there. Compare this to other T10s. Like we did a bit of quick research. The lowest end of Tuck was a 2.95 GPA and a 650 GMAT edition, and for NYU is a 3.03 and a 650. So a 2.3 is quite far and away from those T10 GPA averages, and that gives me concern. So academic is a little bit of a problem for us. Professionally, look, pretty compelling. It's a small but curated and thoughtful buffet of things that B schools love. So operator decisions, developing new innovation for companies, AI, and some finance thrown into the mix. I think it's a pretty strong mix of things that you can take in any which direction to fill in any gaps to the profile. So professional is pretty strong. Demographics not specified, so we won't opine there. Goals, yeah, similar to you, Sam. IB and M&A consulting is a little bit hard for me to just, you know, envision for this candidate given their stats, not just a GPA, but, you know, if OP said something about a family business or finding a way to augment their offering as we did in the prior example, I think I would feel a bit better. But as it stands today, this profile is giving me quite a bit of pauses.
Yeah,
quite a few pauses.
I'm aligned. Where to start? I mean, yeah, in terms of how the schools I think are going to be looking at this, they've got a GPA that's well below, like, yeah, it'll be the lowest GPA in the class. At the same time, they have a GMAT focus, which might be the highest GMAT in the class. If you happen to come across a school in that, you know, by applying to lots of schools, you're lucky and you have one that's really looking to raise its GMAT average and already has a high GPA average in the class, maybe that's a possibility. Let's put that aside and focus on the goals and the professional side of things. So let me give you a little bit about my background. For those that don't know, I worked in investment banking before I became an admissions consultant. I worked on basically traded equity derivatives in London and in Amsterdam. And I went through the graduate training program at Societe Generale, which is one of the biggest derivative houses in the world. And I went through the internship program on the trading floor at Bank of America Merrill Lynch. I know what investment banks are looking for. And I don't want to pee on your fire, OP, but you definitely need to have a backup plan, because I think there's a few things here that are going to be an issue. One is they're going to also look at the GPA. Unfortunately, that's a fact of life. They're going to look at that. They also do not take luxury goods as an industry particularly seriously. To be a little bit frivolous, luxury goods is known for being very fashionable, very glam, lots of nice optics. The marketing side is incredible, but they are not known by any stretch of their imagination for quantitative rigor. Although that might be changing, it's still a perception. It's going to be very unlikely that anybody pivoting from luxury goods into investment banking is going to do so very easily, even with an MBA, to be really honest. So that's going to be a question mark. Now, putting that kind of professional goal aside, that doesn't actually matter for you at this stage. You just got to get into the business school. So how are you going to get into the business school? Put that goal aside. Put that goal aside. I would encourage you to focus on a narrative that uses the luxury goods angle to your advantage. As I mentioned, luxury goods is not a technical, like quantitative area. Using AI in luxury goods, you will be one of the first. So I would carve out a narrative of being cutting edge in terms of quant analysis, in terms of AI, in the luxury goods space, and apply as a luxury goods applicant. If you get in, you can recruit for IB all you want, but let's just get you in first. John, is that resonating?
I like that. I think I do agree that luxury goods will probably not be, it's not an automatic link, to go from luxury goods to, working in quantitative finance or any kind of finance. And so I like the idea of using AI, finding ways to bring luxury goods, into the 21st or helping make that industry a little bit more dynamic, competitive in today's world. I think that's a pretty smart idea to pursue.
Okay. I think the other angle that might be interesting is to focus on the sports side. So, MBA trainer. Now, we don't have that much detail on this. Train MBA players 3 to 4 times a week in college and a bit afterwards, not just shooting drills. Okay, so we don't really know what's involved there. But if OP wanted to frame himself as a entrepreneur and build an entrepreneurship narrative, could maybe say you'd have to position this coaching as like a company. You'd have to frame it, maybe make a website for it, make it look like an actual company that's a coaching company that has grown into a company training MBA players. It's got to the pinnacle of its industry. That could be a way to position OP as an entrepreneurial applicant, which might also be very, very interesting to business schools. Again, no link to investment banking, but could be a really interesting leadership story coming off the back of that.
Yep.
Another angle. Thoughts, John?
Well, I guess that's a no to the Kevin Durant anecdote and saving the company from bankruptcy. But in all seriousness, I think there are a couple of angles that OP can play. One is that luxury angle, trying to make it more dynamic with AI and finding a leadership motivation angle with coaching, or maybe finding ways OP talking about opportunities in the category that he can potentially address only because he's had firsthand exposure to it. I think all those are all credible paths to take. Certainly much better and much more improved than this M&A finance route.
Okay. So conclusion. OP, given that GPA, you're going to have to apply to a lot of schools and hopefully find one that is willing to overlook it in favor of the GMAT. Fine. 2, move away from investment banking. If you were to go to investment banking, you'd probably go on into the compliance side. They are recruiting compliance and they value people with compliance experience. But by the sounds of it, compliance isn't really where you want to go, and I don't blame you. And just, apply to as many schools as you can, because I think you're going to have to play the numbers game. Focus on a narrative that is more either MBA or luxury goods, digitalization, luxury goods, cutting edge of tech. Those are the narratives that seem to work for me. John, I think we've roasted this guy enough. Should we move on?
Pretty dark roast. Good luck, OP. Let's move on.
Good luck. Okay. Another applicant targeting T15. Black female, GPA 3.4, technically 3.2 at one school, 3.6 at another. I have leadership experience. Now, this is interesting work experience. Marketing for a well-known, internationally known entertainment company. But was laid off 1.5 years ago and has been unemployed ever since. Close to securing another role, but not there yet. So we have an unemployed applicant here. Interested in becoming chief marketing officer for a small e-com company. Think Pinterest, Netflix, etc. OP says she's an incredibly strong writer. Okay, OP. Working on the quant, and so he's struggling with the quant side of the test. Right. Figured out my best way is to just get a high GMAT score. Plan to take it in July. Target schools: Yale, Columbia, USC, Chicago, Georgetown, Howard. Okay, too late for MLT. Are there any other programs I can join to strengthen my application? Right, John, not too much detail here for us, but let's roast what we can. Give us a profile evaluation.
All right. Some challenges in this profile. Let's start with the academics. A 3.4 blended is not moving the needle. I think there's some nuances here. If OP graduated with a 3.6 as the latter school, I think, and don't quote me on this, some schools may take that as more of a priority over what the GPA was before she transferred.
Okay.
So dependent on what that order is, could look better than a 3.4. Professionally, look, congrats on getting through to the finish line on those marketing roles. Good luck, OP. It's a tough market out there. I will say that a 1.5-year unemployment gap can be tough. It would behoove her to talk about some of the things that she was able to work on during this time, if not extracurriculars, then personal development, other ways that she was able to upskill herself. Looks like she had a side business, so maybe talk a little bit about how she was able to scale that and any kind of impact that came out of it. I like the fintech and entertainment marketing angle, and I think that would play into a strong narrative. And then demographic, look, she's a Black female that's underrepresented, in the application pool. Goals make sense. It seems to me, it looks to me like a clean transition from what she's doing now to what she wants to do later. We'll see if that fintech angle muddies the narrative a little bit, but I think functionally the marketing is pretty strong through and through. Just keep in mind that some marketing communication focused roles are not MBA friendly. And what I mean by that, Sam, is that there are a ton of people who become leaders in this space that don't need an MBA. They go through the agency route, or they go through a creative route. Content marketing is one of those routes where some people don't need the MBA. And so if there's a way to find roles that leverage the MBAs better, then this is especially more common among tech companies. Great. Otherwise,
product marketing manager jumps to mind, right?
Correct. So any kind of product market, a PMM role, a marketing strategy role, anything with growth in it, and in an industry that attracts more MBAs, I think that's what OP should focus on.
Yeah, I like it. Okay, let's talk about this unemployment aspect, because it's quite common, surprisingly common, how many people unemployed, applying to business school. Is this going to torpedo my chances? Let's talk about it. One, you're unemployed. Let's use this to your advantage. One, you should have lots of time. Get that GMAT. Just absolutely crush that GMAT. You've not really got any excuses not to. It's not like you're working during the day. Put in the hours, get that score higher. One. Two, optional essay. Use the optional essay to explain that gap. As John's just mentioned, what have you done during that time that makes you a stronger applicant for the MBA? Maybe some extracurricular work you can talk about, your own entrepreneurial venture. In fact, John, actually, maybe there's potential to take that entrepreneurial venture and where is it? So here, so for the past, where is it? I do run my own marketing consulting business on the side. OP. What you could do is formalize that and put that on your resume and make yourself an entrepreneurship applicant.
Yeah.
That's an option. Now, I don't know how serious that is. That marketing consultancy might be like, minuscule, in which case schools might see through that. So be careful. But if you've got enough work there that you can pad that out and make that look like your job, maybe you weren't even laid off at all. Maybe you left work to go and start your own entrepreneurship venture. Just an idea to bear in mind. Either way,
I love it.
Optional essay, explain what you did during that time. Finally, you've got these jobs that you are applying for, hopefully in the final stages of, and hopefully have maybe secured by the time you see this this roast. Good luck. I would encourage you to apply with that role in the bag if possible. That does sound like, given the caliber of these roles that you're applying to, it does look like those would strengthen your application. So Hopefully those convert in the next few weeks and months. If you're applying in September, that'll give you a couple of months in that new job to, so it looks serious on your resume. Question mark over letters of recommendation. Question mark over letters of recommendation. If you've only been in that new job for a couple of months, 2 or 3 months, your recommenders might not be best positioned to write about your achievements because you won't have that many at all by that time. Plus, you don't have really a boss from the previous 1.5 years because you've been unemployed or self-employed. So you're going to have a question mark over recommenders. John, who do you think OP should use for their recommenders?
Well, at this point, there aren't many choices. I think OP should probably defect to a prior supervisor at a prior company, even though it's over 1.5 years ago, and that will help allay concern that departure from the company wasn't, based on performance. Maybe it was part of a, reduction in force. Maybe it was beyond OP's control. Either way, schools are going to want to see endorsement for her time in entertainment marketing.
Yeah.
Now,
particularly if it's a well-known, internationally known brand, it could be that having that recommender could actually be a positive for OP.
And even better, what will be even better is if OP has kept in touch with one of the supervisors during the time of unemployment. And if OP were to, update, the recommender on a few things, some of that content can port into the recommendation, and it can help promote a little bit more recency versus the awkward situation of diagnosing OP's performance that is 2 years old, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's one to consider.
I like it. I was also going to say the other recommender might be worth considering a client in the marketing consulting business. Now, you've got to be careful with clients, right? There is a bit of a conflict of interest here. Why would a client write something bad about a supplier, about their marketing firm? Right? So there's a question mark there. You've got to be a bit careful. But a strong recommendation, especially if it's your second recommendation from a client on the marketing side who has, for example, hired you once and then hired you again because your work was so good, that could also be a strong letter of recommendation.
Yeah. I think that's a rule of thumb. I mean, when most people apply from in entrepreneurship or in family businesses, no one's going to ask their dad to write a recommendation. You're going to have to ask a client who's able to provide objective, evaluation of performance, and the facts speak for themselves, Sam, right? A repeat order, increase in invoices, that also helps. And I think if not that, I think an equivalent example could be an investor as well. Just so someone's able to witness their performance from objectively. I think what it comes down to is that second question in the recommender about a time when they deliver feedback to the client. If OP can see a scenario where OP has acted on feedback from whether it's a client or someone else and improved in that regard, that's what's going to make the recommendation that much more legitimate.
That's nice. Yeah, a client can and does give feedback, so that would make that question nice. Yeah. Okay, there's one other point that I wanted to mention before we move on, which is this demographic idea. So you, as you say, schools are looking to build a diverse cohort, and Black women tend to be underrepresented in business schools, which makes you as a Black female applicant a attractive applicant, all else equal. But the question here is, late to join via MLT in this application cycle, are there any other programs I can join? I think, OP, you should consider the consortium. If you haven't already looked it up, look up the consortium. It's a group who basically streamline the application process for underrepresented applicants. I believe the criteria are, I think, Black Americans, Hispanic Americans. There's a couple of other groups. They give resources. There's like a network, etc., that you can be part of. They host events, which will help you get lots of applications through the door with a little bit less work. For example, they bundle the essays if you apply through the consortium. So look up the consortium. That's worth a punt. But I think also you're going to qualify for a lot of scholarships. You qualify for the female scholarships. You qualify for the Black in Business scholarships, etc. You're going to qualify for a lot of scholarships. So as you say, your big goal is to get scholarships. I definitely think that if you include some lower ranked schools in your target list, you will be able to secure some scholarships, particularly if you can get that GMAT into the ballpark of these schools. 625 or higher, I would say, John. Would you agree?
Yep.
Well, great stuff. Okay, OP, good luck. And good luck with the job, with the interviews and the job hunt. John, next profile.
All right.
Profile number 5, last profile of the day before we move into the bonus questions. An interesting one here. 27-year-old male, undergrad 3.3, chemical engineer, 740 GMAT, worked as a process engineer in aerospace and defense. But John, here's where things get exciting. A radioactive waste management engineer. What? Working in nuclear energy. 2.5 years of experience, will be about 4.5 at matriculation. Goals. I've done co-ops in water treatment and have this clear like environmental narrative going on. Looking to pivot into strategy consulting. Another applicant looking to pivot into strategy consulting, but specializing in sustainability, which is nice. Need opinions on whether to determine if a top T20, T15, T25 school would be possible. Considering LBS, but lack of international experience. Extracurriculars also focused on this nuclear background, which looks like it might be the basis for a narrative there. Looking for suggestions on which schools to apply to and how to improve profile. Okay, John, profile evaluation. How do you see these academics?
I like the profile overall. Look, that GPA is a little bit lukewarm, but a 740 does help, and I would obviously be prepared to explain, the discrepancy between your GPA and the GMAT in an optional essay. Professionally, I think that radioactive waste management role is very differentiated and very interesting. It's kind of, in some ways, unsexy, but sexy at the same time. It's sort of like this trend nowadays of all these PEs investing in HVAC businesses. It kind of strikes me as this is a critical industry. This is why I care about it, and this is why you should care too. So, provide an OP spotlight. It spotlights how interesting it is, and it could be a strong sell to AdCom, especially coupled with their prior experience in nuclear, in aerospace and defense, more specifically. The goal, the demographic, beyond being Canadian, I think it's nothing that stands out way too much. And the goals, look, are a little bit boring for me. I think this is a real opportunity to go beyond the cookie cutter. I want to work in consulting, to maybe focus on, if OP were to focus on consulting, I would look at more niche consulting firms in underrepresented geographies. But I think this is an opportunity for OP to consider maybe LDPs at companies like, the aerospace companies or maybe like a BP. There's so many different directions that OP can go into and build his industry and functional experience there. I don't know enough about the space to be able to give specific recommendations, but I know enough to say that if you're just going to pick consulting, you're selling yourself short.
I'm aligned to some extent on that. So if I remember correctly, Lockheed Martin, for example, that's an aerospace and defense company that have a leadership development program. It could be a nice post MBA role, although aerospace and defense doesn't really seem to be where I think OP stands out. I think this environmental solutions angle is nice. Look, I did a quick search of this, and I found this. I did a quick Google, and I just Googled McKinsey waste management, and they've got this whole rethinking recycling narrative. This is just an article that they put out about it. But I think if you were to take sustainability consulting specifically and really narrow down on the nuclear sustainability side, I think there's still a potential to differentiate yourself, OP, from the boring consulting goal people that John is referring to here. There is an opportunity to maybe make that stand out. Other options include potentially focusing on companies that are involved in waste management technology. Now, neither John nor I are experts in nuclear waste recycling, but I bet there are some companies that are focused on that. In fact, I'm sure there are. And I'm imagining like a corporate strategy role at one of those companies would be a really nice goal that lets you write about your work experience in nuclear waste management, lets you write about your extracurricular work in nuclear as well. As we've said before, you don't have to go into that after the MBA, right? Apply to McKinsey, do whatever you want while you're doing your MBA. We just need to get you into the program. As far as narratives go, something like a corporate strategy at a nuclear waste management technology company, or even a company that are just moving nuclear waste, that could be interesting and certainly something I've never seen before. And I think the schools therefore would be intrigued by. John, do you want to build on that?
I agree. I like that angle. I like that you brought up, the waste, the waste management capability within McKinsey, and I suspect there are other companies that have that too. I just think in order for OP to truly embrace this space, it shouldn't just be I want to work in McKinsey and I'm going to find a niche thing within there that'll get me in there. I think absolutely makes sense for OP to mention a growing space within top management and consulting firms like McKinsey, i.e. that capability, and there are opportunities for him to explore other areas as well. I think that industry should be the focus, and maybe the function can be secondary to it.
Yeah, I've just done a quick Google for nuclear waste management companies. Right, let me show you this. So this, to me, would be a really good place to start. Strategic work at one of these companies would be a really unique narrative that
Yeah,
business schools have not seen much, if at all. That's how
yeah,
you're going to stand out, OP. Way more
yeah,
unique than saying I'm going to go to McKinsey. Even if you do apply to
yeah,
McKinsey, I think this is the way
yeah.
to approach it. And particularly if you can demonstrate like a particular challenge that these companies are facing. I'm imagining, for example, like in my work, I encountered the following challenge, and I tell the story of how they bumped up against an issue. My mission is to eradicate this challenge so that we can use more clean energy, so that nuclear can grow and we can generate
Yeah,
more clean nuclear energy. I'm going to
yeah,
join Orano as a corporate strategist to expand their presence in this particular area. However, for that, I need an MBA because I don't have any financial analysis skills just yet. I
yeah,
don't know strategic thinking. And so I'm going to take the consulting classes or the strategic
yeah.
thinking classes with the MBA. And that narrative would really, really resonate. And I think, frankly, OP, if you can do that, you do that nicely. I think talking about target schools, I think you could do. I think you're in a really, really strong bucket. I do think you should be targeting LBS. There's no guarantees, but I do think LBS would consider your profile strongly. By the way, you might want to tailor your goals to European or British companies if you're going to for the LBS application, but still really nice. I think the T25 and T15s that are a no-brainer, and I think you've got to throw a couple of M7 applications in there for kicks. Do you agree, John?
I agree. I think that's a good plan.
Yeah, cool. Okay, let's do it. So, John, we have a couple of final open-ended, these are not so much profile evaluations, but just open-ending issues that are on the minds of Redditors at the moment that I thought we would talk about. First one, mindset before starting your MBA. I'm starting school this fall as I return from a well-deserved vacation after a year of GMAT study, GMAT essays, interviewing. Only a year. OP, you did it quite quickly. I feel it's time to start getting into the mindset for this new life. Okay. How is a typical day in the life of an MBA in your first year? Is it hectic? John, we can definitely talk about that. How would you adjust to the student lifestyle again? No paycheck means lower spending power. Sure does. How flexible do you keep yourself to try new things that your classmates are doing? Thank you for your insights. All right, John, where do you want to start?
Well, look, I think it's hectic, but I think it's hectic in a great way. And I think the flexibility of an MBA program is such that folks can um, choose to focus on areas that help them in any desired way. So to put this in perspective, some folks in my class were all about academics. So that means taking more electives, spending more time on the case studies, making sure that they show up class, really, really buttoned up. There are others who already have their businesses, they're scaling their businesses, and so they're using MBAs purely for networking, and they don't really care about much about other things, which is totally fine too. And there are others who are just, hey, I'm a sponsored consultant and I want to make friends and have a great time. There are so many ways you can take uh, your business school experience into. I think the mistake is obviously not tackling any of these, but it is hectic in the best possible way. And I would think that if you would probably agree with me, Sam, that if you were to relive your MBA experience again, you may change a few things, but uh, not doing an MBA is definitely not one of them.
Yeah, right. So I had a couple of thoughts on, is it hectic? I mean, first thing is, it depends what time of year, right? An MBA is one of those, it's a cyclical activity in that like different parts of the year, you're focused on different things. I studied really hard for exams. I wanted to get a good GPA, good grades, etc. I got on the dean's list. So there was a time of the year where I was just locked up in the library. Quite rare for MBAs, but still. Other people are absolutely laser focused on recruiting, and there are certain times of the year when recruiting really gets heavy, and those times are hectic for recruitment, etc. So it varies depending on the year, and it obviously varies depending on how much you take on. There's a saying which goes something along the lines of doing an MBA is like drinking from a fire hose. And
Mhm.
that visual kind of captures this idea of there's so much coming at you, you can't take it all in. And if you try and take it all in, you're just going to get blown in the face by the fire hose, and you're not going to get any water at all. You've got to be a bit more specific about like being careful about what you take on, and trying to have a bit of an ethos going into it. For example, I
Mhm.
decided I did a 1 year MBA at Oxford. I decided I'm not going to do any recruitment really during the program and leave that till afterwards, so that I can get the most out of the actual activities during the program. So it was still hectic, but it was hectic because I was doing things like rowing. I started rowing for
Mhm.
the first time, and
Mhm.
that getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to go and row on a nearly frozen river, and like it was an experience for sure. Was it hectic? I made it hectic, but it doesn't have to be.
Mhm. Yeah.
How do you adjust to the student lifestyle again? No paycheck. John, most people who do an MBA have got a bit of money saved up. It's not like student during undergrad where you're eating like, rice
Mhm.
with rice.
Mhm.
It's quite a nice experience, isn't it?
Well, I think it depends. I think there are some people who come at it from having been in finance for a while and they have a little bit of a buffer. And so I don't think I don't think reality is that rosy for everyone. Some people have been marketers before.
Okay.
But I will say that even, in the absence, like prior income and savings aside, a lot of people realize that MBA is a shared experience. And so even those who don't have much saved up, they will take loans. Part of the loans is obviously to pay for tuition, but part of the loans, a lot of the loans is devoted to paying for many trips, whether that's trips abroad, international trips, just going out with friends. I think that's an invaluable part of the business school experience. Obviously, no pressure to participate in all of it, but the fact that everyone willingly uh, devotes their resources towards these activities, shows that you should have fun, if it's on if it's on borrowed dime.
Right. Let me give an anecdote about my spending habits during an MBA. So I was one of these guys, as you say, who came from banking. I also got a substantial scholarship to Oxford, which is a short program. All that to say, financially, I was all right during the program. But I didn't do any trips, right? I didn't go anywhere during the program. That wasn't where I decided to spend my money. Instead, I did things like my study group. We're working late on some project, whatever. And I said, right, guys, pack it up. I'm taking you to dinner. And I took my study group to dinner. And yeah, so we kind of worked in the restaurant. We were still brainstorming, we were still talking, whatever. And I bought dinner. And those sorts of experiences for me like brought me closer to the study group, and it was a really nice way. And yeah, it cost some money, but it was a lovely way of doing an MBA. A little bit spendy, a little bit spendy. I'm quite tight by my standards. That was quite spendy. Right, John, how flexible do you need to be? What was something that you did for the first time during your MBA?
Oh, well, I think Berkeley Haas tended to focus more on um bonding episodes that aren't, Yacht Week that Kellogg or Harvard would put on. Our version of Yacht Week was, you've spent a few weeks with your classmates. Now we're gonna put you in random groups of 20, and we'll have you go on a houseboat in a lake with figure out how to drive it around the lake and just work as a community to, drive the boat, land the boat at islands, share bunks with strangers you never met before, and just make it all work and cook your own food. It was the polar opposite of things that energized me. Let's say that I love my creature comfort, Sam, but I would not have traded that experience for anything else. It was an enriching experience. And it just got me so much closer to my classmates, even the ones that I didn't think that I would bond with. So that was one example of many things that were first for me at my wonderful 2 years at Berkeley Haas.
That sounds like drama. I just imagine being a fly on the wall of your houseboat.
Two,
Someone
two,
doesn't
two.
flush the loo.
Well, 20 people sharing 2 bathrooms with recycled lake water is a recipe for disaster. But we made it work. Four of the people who used to be in the military. One piloted a nuclear submarine, and the other was, led troops of hundreds of people. So probably for them, this was glamping.
The
The equivalent of glamping.
Submariner had no issue with it. It's probably just
Oh,
frustrated everybody else
no,
being
probably
rubbish,
not.
right?
Yeah.
Fine. So I think the conclusion, OP, on this is open-mindedness. Go into it with, save up a bit of money. That's the big thing. That will open some doors. That will let you be more relaxed, more adventurous. Get yourself financially set up before you start. Go into it with a mindset of how you're going to focus. Are you going to recruit hard? If so, which industry? Are you not going to recruit? Like, get a bit of a feeling for that. And generally, you'll go into it with an open mind, because as John and I have just demonstrated, some of the most memorable parts of your MBA are going to be things that you're not even anticipating right now. The things that you're going to remember from the MBA are things you're not even aware of. So go in with an open mind and you'll get a lot out of it. Okay, last point, John. Final thing, just a throwaway one. Reddit is well known for its slightly outlandish posts occasionally, and we've got a great one here. Should we force MBAs to do manual labor? So the post is about how disconnected MBA programs have become from the nature of real work. We have so many young consultants who walk into a warehouse and confidently suggest new layouts without understanding how it's going to affect people's knees. Should we institute 6 to 12 months field immersion requirement for graduation? You shouldn't be allowed to manage anyone if you've never had to clock in. I love this. John, do you think MBAs are so disconnected from the real world? And if so, is this really the way to tackle it?
I get where OP is coming from. This is well intentioned, and I completely agree with some of these grievances. How can you develop empathy when when you haven't had this lived-in experience, of managing these people in the first place, of having experienced what these folks you're managing have gone through themselves. But what I will say is that an MBA is an expensive investment, both in terms of time and money. To mandate someone spend 6 to 12 months of doing manual labor, which probably won't pay all too much, and then say, okay, you're going to be $250,000 in debt. How do you feel about that? I think that's a hard sell. And I think business schools already do a pretty good job of selecting people, many of whom may have experience or have had exposure to manual labor in some shape or form. I mean, had my fair share of manual labor summer jobs when I was in high school, and early on in college. And there are others who have, spent longer time doing these things. I think if you were to encounter a classroom of 80 people, I'm sure there are a ton of these who have had the experience, have gone through the experience already. So I think, yes and no. I think schools should be mindful that this is a thing, but I don't think I don't think this mandate is going to be a realistic expectation for people who are looking to, again, sink their time and money into an expensive endeavor.
I love it. I was a cook during to pay for my undergrad. I was scrubbing dishes, getting shouted at. And I'm not going to lie, I think it really helped me get into investment banking, or at least survive in investment banking, because I was used to getting shouted at. I was used to working late. I was used to starting early, whatever. It wasn't, it just, investment banking was just was sort of the same stress, but with a suit on. I empathize with with the sentiment behind this point. I do think there's value to it. 6 months is probably excessive. What about like a month, or even just like a 2 week stint? You probably learn most of what you need to learn from a 2 week stint. You have to do 12 months of it. Anyway, bit tongue in cheek there, but I'm glad we touched on it. So, John, lovely to see you again, as usual. Anybody watching, if you would like to have your profile evaluated by John and I, if you're looking to hire a consultant, John and I are working with applicants in round one this coming cycle. Get in touch. samweeks.com is the website. You can book a meeting. Top right-hand corner of the screen, there is a schedule a meeting. You're going to be asked to submit your information, your resume, your GPA, all of this stuff. And we obviously work with people who are serious about MBA applications. We're not just going to speak to anybody about doing manual labor. Get in touch if you're serious. John, great to see you again. Look forward to next week.
Likewise. Thank you, Sam.
Take care. See ya.